Hey everyone, this is Pastor John from Resurrection Church, and have you ever thought maybe that your life would take a certain course, a certain direction, and that you would be at certain key points of success or achievement or whatever along the way, right? Maybe it's in your career. You've thought, hey, I'll be at a certain level by this age or this time. Or maybe it's in your own spiritual walk with the Lord where you thought, I think I'll be at a different place by this time. And it's not happening, maybe it's not happening the way you envisioned it. Or maybe God has given you a huge calling or desire to do something for Him, and you're nowhere near achieving that, and it could be frustrating. Because you feel like it's a big delay, and it's like, when is this going to happen? I'm not progressing as fast as I thought I would. What happens is that we often think of as this the goal, right? The ultimate destination as the goal. And God doesn't just look at the goal, He also looks at the processes along the way, right? And so in the scripture, there's a story of a man who sort of faced something like that. His name is Joseph, and he's in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis. It's my favorite story in the Old Testament. And Joseph is the youngest son at this time of Jacob. Jacob's sons will become the nation of Israel, and Jacob loves Joseph, and Joseph's brothers, Jacob's other sons, they hate Joseph because he's dad's favorite. And to make matters worse, Joseph has this crazy dream where basically it predicts that one day Joseph's family, including his brothers, will come and bow down to their younger brother. And they hate him for that. In fact, they decide to sell him to slavery. And Joseph finds himself in Egypt as a slave at 17 years old. Now he first goes to a man named Potiphar. He's an official basically, and he works for Potiphar. And the scripture says that the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord blessed Joseph and caused everything he did to prosper. And Potiphar recognized that and trusted Joseph with everything in his house, and the Lord was with him. And one day, Potiphar's wife decides that she likes Joseph, and of course, he doesn't like her in the same way, and he runs out of the house, and she falsely accuses him, and Joseph gets thrown into prison. So he goes from Potiphar's house to prison. And the scripture says that while in prison, the Lord was with Joseph and caused him to be a blessing and to prosper, so that even the chief jailer entrusted Joseph with running things, because the Lord was with him while he was in prison. And while he was in prison, two of Pharaoh's key officials were thrown into prison, and one of them was the chief cupbearer. And each man had a dream that Joseph, through God's help, was able to interpret their dreams. And the chief cupbearer would be restored. And before he leaves, Joseph says, hey, can you mention me to Pharaoh to get me out of this place? I should not be in prison. I was falsely accused. I was sold into slavery. Can you mention me to Pharaoh to get me out? Well, the chief cupbearer forgot about Joseph until 2 years later, 2 years of waiting in prison. Finally, Pharaoh has a couple dreams of his own, and they bring Joseph out to interpret those dreams. And because of his interpretation, Joseph actually goes from prisoner to prime minister, and he's put in charge of everything. And wouldn't you know it, later on, Joseph's own family comes and bow down to him. Now here's the thing. Ultimately, God called Joseph to be in Egypt to save his people because it was a great famine. But you know something? The first thing I want to teach you is this. God's delays are often God's divine appointments. God's delays are God's divine appointments. You know that God has ultimately called you to a certain place, but you're stuck. You're delayed in Potiphar's house, or you're delayed in prison. But if Joseph had not been in Potiphar's house, he wouldn't have been falsely accused and thrown into prison, right? But if he had not been in prison at the time when the chief cupbearer happened to be there, he wouldn't have been able to interpret the chief cupbearer's dreams. And the chief cupbearer remembered him a few years later. See, it was God's delay, but that was also God's divine appointment. Everything in God's timetable for your life is going to happen at His time. It's God's timing with God's will where things happen. Okay, so God's delays are God's divine appointment. Second thing I want you to learn is this. When you can't be where you know God has ultimately called you to be, glorify Him where He has you. When you can't be where He has called you to be, glorify Him where He has you. Joseph was used in prison, in Potiphar's house, in prison, and finally in all of Egypt. Wherever God has you, it may not be that ultimate destination, but you can glorify Him, bring Him glory where He has you. You can be a light for Christ where He has you, and God will use you wherever He has you, because ultimately the ultimate destination is not just a position like that God is going to bring you, but ultimately it's developing your faith to be purified, to be refined, to be matured, so that you resemble and reflect Christ Himself wherever God has you. So God's delays are God's divine appointments. And when you can't be where you know God has called you to be, glorify Him where He has you. I'm Pastor John. God bless you. We'll see you later.